SpongeBob betrayed us!
There is no media property that's closer to my heart than SpongeBob SquarePants. I was a bitterly loyal fan growing up, and my love for it has led me to get unnecessarily offended whenever I think the franchise has been taken in the wrong direction. I just know that the day will come when I turn on it and never look back. That movie where they go to the surface and become CGI superheroes is sure to be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Pretty good, actually.
Well, I know that tacky Broadway musical adaptation could never be remotely good.
That was pretty good, actually.
The new seasons of the show?
Good.
The Battle for Bikini Bottom remake?
Good.
The third movie? Aha! After its director and writer left the project, storylines centering around an alien cat invasion and an It's a Wonderful Life homage were scrapped, and numerous delays, the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run is here, and also isn't. I don't think any theatrical release has been impacted by the coronavirus more than this. All of the merchandise was out before the film was indefinitely delayed, so that it could launch on CBS All Access next year in the United States. This was clearly a last-minute decision, as all the latest ads just end with the phrase, "see the movie." I sure would love to do that. Canadians got it in theaters in August, and it was recently released on Netflix this past week, everywhere but North America and China. Luckily, I was able to check it out, thanks to the last video's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. They didn't sponsor this one.
Hey, that's my family you're talking about.
I just want to show how my American audience can watch this film if they already have Netflix, since that consists of like 7% of my audience. The following will be a spoiler-free look into this unoriginally titled film, which means I'll only be referencing promotional material featured in trailers and music videos. Let's begin with the main man behind it, writer and director Tim Hill. He's best known for directing not one, but 2 films about grumpy cats. However, he's had a long history with SpongeBob, writing on the first couple of episodes and movie, along with serving as Season 4's story editor. The inspiration specifically taken from Hill's time on the show is undeniable. Strokes of Season 1 can be found in the designs of folks like SpongeBob and Sandy, as well as their original relationship as love interests. It shares the structure and some elements of the 2004 film, and the premise of SpongeBob losing his pet snail Gary comes from arguably the most memorable and emotional Season 4 outing. Have you seen this snail? The Phineas and Ferb movies I recently talked about prove that using a single episode of a show to act as the basis for a grander story can work somewhat well. But Sponge on the Run tries to double dip and ends up unfocused. One scene early on has SpongeBob and Patrick arguing over whether or not their journey will be one of a buddy comedy or that of a singular hero, which is an issue that the actual story faces. There's no central character dynamic. Gary is merely an objective who has no agency of his own. SpongeBob and Patrick act as the same entity that only separate for meaningless conflict or gag. SpongeBob's bond with his friends and summoning the courage to stand up for himself are highlighted towards the end, but those themes are ignored by a majority of the runtime. Sometimes I find that it's too reminiscent of what came before, and that's a detriment to the film in its first half hour.
Another day, another migraine.
The opening contains little fanfare, when it could have used a more attention-grabbing set piece, as opposed to a long string of montages and basic character exchanges. Plankton has a brief scheme that feels slightly cinematic, but for the most part, this first act feels like a drawn-out episode. There is a lot to set up, both for the story and to catch up new viewers without pandering, but it contributes to a lopsided structure, where more time is spent building up to the journey and at the destination than actually embarking on the journey. Not enough time is spent on key details of the premise, and full sequences could be cut out that would sacrifice little important information. The most egregious example of the latter are the flashbacks that show SpongeBob meeting his friends at summer camp. For being the origin stories of these characters, and as a first impression of the upcoming Camp Coral miniseries, they are very surface level. I don't think making the cast cuter and their voices higher is enough to support what are otherwise bland sequences. Although, I do like the actors they got for SpongeBob and Sandy. They captured the inflections of the originals alright.
I'm Sandy Cheeks from Texas. Hi, Sandy. I'm SpongeBob. Pleased to meet you.
I think it would be a lot funnier if Squidward's voice was the same as usual, but that's just me. The worst thing about these moments is that they interrupt an otherwise touching scene that had a terrific grasp of the main cast relationship to SpongeBob. It's one of two scenes that held a lot of emotional weight for me, but weren't followed through on. I don't really care about Camp Coral being a retcon in a franchise like this. After all, the premise of one of my favorite SpongeBob episodes is a big retcon. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think it holds enough potential to justify going against the established canon, or serving as an out-of-place backdoor pilot. What I do care about is this.
It's not a video chat app like Skype or FaceTime or anything.
This doesn't make any sense. Shouldn't SpongeBob have an underwater equivalent to Skype and FaceTime like Instaclam and Snapchat? These are the retcons we should be angry about. One factor of SpongeBob's longevity is its timelessness. Kids today may not know who Pantera and Triumph the Insult Comic Dog are, but the lack of current pop culture references has kept the world of Bikini Bottom accessible, no matter if an episode is brand new or a decade old. So let me tell you, it was jarring when a few minutes in, Sponge on the Run said,
"Hope you guys like Weezer."
Unfortunately, someone with a name as cool as Rivers Cuomo is not enough to distract me from how executive-driven this movie feels. It's not entirely unprecedented for SpongeBob to have licensed songs briefly act as the soundtrack, but they dominate the score. Despite Hans Zimmer being involved, his underscore was surprisingly underplayed. I give it props for apparently being recorded in quarantine, but it was mixed very quietly with the audio, and I can't remember any standout moments, outside of a few Hawaiian cues that all sound the same. Instead, there's songs like On the Road Again and Dreamweaver that sound like someone was asked to pick music for certain scenes on the spot. SpongeBob sings Livin' La Vida Loca sounds like a YouTube video I would have watched in 2013, but here it is in a major motion picture released in this magical year of 2020. I'm happy that a few musicians from previous SpongeBob projects were brought in to do a musical number and credits song, which is a natural fit, unlike Snoop Dogg's collab with K-pop group Monsta X. I don't think it's good, but I am glad it exists. This live-action sequence only feels like it's here to shoehorn in some celebrities, including Keanu Reeves as SpongeBob and Patrick's spirit guide. Most of the time, he just looks confused about when he's supposed to be speaking or moving, but I kinda like how he sticks around, just to show how tired he is of putting up with SpongeBob and Patrick's crap.
Hey, losers.
On that note, there's a healthy dose of guest voices as well. Some are fine, like Aquafina's character gave me a few laughs, and Tiffany Haddish plays Tiffany Haddock, who's only here for a few seconds to show off her pronounced ankles. I guess Gene Scallop made it okay for celebrities to basically play themselves in this franchise. The villain of the picture is King Poseidon, the vain ruler of the Seven Seas. He shares the same position and personality as King Neptune from the first movie, and it's kinda ridiculous how Poseidon is the third iteration of this character. He's voiced by Matt Berry, the best parts of 12 Forever and Disenchantment, who also played Bubbles the Dolphin in Sponge Out of Water. I love the man's voice, but it couldn't have been an intentional choice to cast the same person in different roles between sequels. It feels like most of the world forgot that Sponge Out of Water existed, and I will not stand for that.
Oh my goodness!
I understand the inclusion of these modern elements and mixed media, as that's all been a part of the show at some point. The difference here is that Sponge on the Run ramps them up to a degree that breaks the immersion of this isolated underwater utopia. I now have to come to terms with the implication that there's a fish person equivalent of Ricky Martin, because SpongeBob and Patrick know the lyrics to Livin' La Vida Loca. Okay, that's pretty neat. When the first trailer for Sponge on the Run was released, the signs of its unoriginality and Hollywood style were already there, but there was one aspect that I knew was going to make it worth watching anyway. Following in the footsteps of the Peanuts movie in 2015, there's been a trend of computer animated films attempting to translate the movement and designs of traditional animation into the third dimension. Mikros Animation, known for their work on DreamWorks' Captain Underpants, was the studio tasked with crafting a SpongeBob movie that looks different from those before it. I'm sad to see that mainstream theatrical 2D animation is basically dead, but doubling down on the CGI helped solve the dilemma that nearly all television adaptations face.
I can't believe we're paying to see something we get on TV for free.
The main goal of the visuals was to capture the snappiness of the original, which was achieved by bringing over features like smears and multiples, having flexible facial expressions that allowed features like eyebrows to disappear or move above the face, and cheating the camera in ways that evoke the shot layouts of the original series. In other words, Plankton's ass has never looked so fully formed.
Now that I'm dummy thick, nothing can stand in the way between me and the Krabby Patty secret formula.
every single surface was given an extreme amount of detail, and lit in ways that reminded viewers of the undersea setting. I was initially disappointed that they didn't recreate the trademark painted close-ups, but then again, the visuals are naturally very similar to those. They're so good that when the setting shifted to live action, I barely noticed. I suppose the lighting could have been significantly altered, the transition could have been more apparent, or maybe I could have been less stupid to not notice the new location. But it does prove how versatile these character models are. It's the change in scenery that I think justifies this film's choice to not be 2D. The second half takes place in the lost city of Atlantic City, and it's filled to the brim with candy-coated imagery. The camera swoops around streets and buildings in a way that magnifies the scale. Look at it go! Having SpongeBob and Patrick go nuts in their version of Las Vegas has that post-movie charm of being an odd idea they go all in on. And the animation does the heavy lifting. The sheer scope of this setting makes up for how often assets are otherwise recycled. There's basically one street in Bikini Bottom that represents the city, and the sets of other scenes can be spotted in the backgrounds. Character models are constantly copy and pasted in crowd scenes, and they were distracting enough that I was spotting them on my first viewing. Even featured extras aren't safe. One of the incidentals is designed after Reg, the salty spittoon bouncer, and I'd like to imagine that he cloned himself and had an identical looking child, so that he can go around asking the entire world how tough they are.
There I am, Gary, there I am!
It doesn't surprise me that the budget was closer to an Illumination film than that of a high-end Disney production. Minor gripes aside, it looks like quality over quantity was the approach taken in making assets, and that certainly paid off. I found the Camp Coral sections to be easy to sit through, since they look just as good as everything else does, and also contain a few clever callbacks. Even if the plot doesn't have a clear trajectory, there's a bit of subtle foreshadowing that tries to tie this disparate package together. A lot of references to the show were unobtrusive, blink or you'll miss it moments. My favorite has to be Kelpie G's jazz instrumental cover of Gary's song from Have You Seen This Snail? It plays over the end of the credits, showing that, to some extent, the team did try to go the extra mile to appeal to fans. They may have completely missed the joke of calling this the paddy wagon, but someone had to fully model Electronics Outhouse in CGI, and that I appreciate. The subtle visual gags are probably the moments I enjoyed most, because the dialogue feels very dry. The cast rarely feels out of character, but the comedy isn't framed in a way that takes advantage of what they can offer. One of the earliest jokes has SpongeBob and Patrick yelling at each other from their houses and irritating Squidward. I don't think there's anything particularly funny about the way they scream or how they react to Squidward. You could have changed their inflection or outfits or punched it up with more sound effects, because as is, it feels very plain and restrained. It makes sense that most of the storyboard artists had worked on the past few seasons of the show, while the writers had more limited experience. I think this movie looks the part, but that feature rarely gels with the humor in a way that elevates both. It makes me worried the future of SpongeBob SquarePants is going to be put in the hands of people who are less and less familiar with what made it so great. But with that said, the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run is nowhere close to being a franchise-killing disaster. It was kinda okay, actually. It's got a similar problem to the recently released Scoob, where it feels like it was made by a committee to be marketable first and entertaining second. Just from looking at how many clips only appeared in the trailer, it's clear that this film was constantly changing. Even with a disappointing amount of marketing gimmicks, I recommend it for the animation alone, as that makes it a SpongeBob experience that you really can't get anywhere else. At least until Camp Coral comes out. Knowing that this miniseries will be made by the show's crew, with an art style similar to this, gives me as much hope as I possibly could have towards such a pointless spin-off. Even if this didn't double as a backdoor pilot, I can't say that it would significantly improve the product we got. I dislike the implications behind a SpongeBob prequel as much as the next guy, but Camp Coral is not the only problem here. I think its impact is a valid reason for anyone to not want to watch or support this film, but Sponge on the Run should be judged on its own merits, not its relationship to a brief experiment that isn't even out yet. Of the three SpongeBob movies, this one is definitely the truth or square of the bunch, pointless cameos and flashbacks included. But I'll take this over watching that episode any day, because it's got some unironically great qualities, even if there's a lot of room for improvement. Some people I talked to really enjoyed it, and more power to them. I'd say that SpongeBob hasn't completely betrayed us. Yet. But I'm not holding my breath. Critically, the issues with its storytelling should not be overlooked, especially if the next film is to be a more direct sequel. But you'll have a much better time if you just give it a shot, and let the always timeless tones of Weezer bring another dimension to Bikini Bottom.
I still think the Alien Cat movie would have been better.